My cousin stole my grandmother's handwritten book of recipes, her entire life's work, to launch her own restaurant. She thought I was too broken to fight back. So instead of suing her, I opened my own pop-up kitchen directly across the street. 4 weeks later, her grand opening sign was replaced by a for-lease banner. And my family, the ones who backed her, were the ones begging for a seat at my table. It was a Thursday, the kind of day that smelled like industrial-grade lemon cleaner and quiet desperation. I was sitting in my cubicle, staring at a spreadsheet that quantified the soul of a tomato sauce. That was my job. A culinary brand strategist. It's a fancy title for someone who tells massive corporations how to make their frozen lasagna taste 7% more authentic without spending more than 3 cents per unit on actual basil. The air hummed with the sound of server fans and the soft, rhythmic clicking of 100 keyboards, a symphony of corporate numbness. My office was a beige box. My computer was a beige box. And I think if I'd pricked my own finger, I would have bled beige. Then, my phone buzzed. A notification from a food blogger's Instagram page. I followed a few, mostly out of a morbid curiosity, a way to see what the world of food was doing while I was stuck in my flavorless purgatory. The post was an announcement. A splashy, professionally designed graphic in millennial pink and gold foil. It read, "Coming soon to the Heritage District. Nonna's Table. An authentic taste of old world Italy, curated by visionary restaurateur Isabella Rossi." Isabella? My cousin. My blood didn't run cold. It didn't boil. It just stopped. For a second, the beige room tilted. Isabella, the visionary, whose greatest culinary achievement was learning how to order catering for her last failed startup. Nonna's Table. Me, Nonna. Our Nonna Lucia. And then I saw the tagline at the bottom, nestled under a cursive logo that was a cheap imitation of my grandmother's handwriting. Generations of flavor, perfected for today. Generations of flavor. I almost laughed. It was a hollow, empty sound in my throat. I knew exactly which generation she was talking about. I knew because I was the one who was supposed to be its keeper. The whole thing had started 6 weeks earlier, on a phone call that should have been a red flag the size of a billboard. It was the anniversary of Nonna Lucia's passing, a day I usually spend quietly, making her famous 7-herb pesto, and just remembering. But my aunt, Sophia, Isabella's mother, had called with an urgent, syrupy sweet request. "Lara, cara," she'd started, her voice oozing the kind of manufactured warmth that always set my teeth on edge. "We're all getting together at your Nonna's house this weekend. Just a little family thing. To clear out a few more boxes. You know your Uncle Matteo. He wants to finally fix that leaky pipe in the basement." I couldn't go. I had a mandatory brand synergy summit in Chicago. A weekend-long nightmare of PowerPoint presentations and trust falls with people named Chad. "I can't, Aunt Sophia. I have to work." "Oh, what a shame." The disappointment in her voice was paper-thin. "Well, don't you worry. Isabella will be there. She can help me direct things. She has such a good eye." "Isabella?" "Of course. My cousin, who saw everything not for what it was, but for what it could be sold for. She saw Nonna's antique furniture as vintage assets. She saw the family stories as brand narrative. She saw love as leverage. I should have known. The feeling in my gut was a low, familiar thrum of anxiety. The same feeling I'd had my entire life whenever Isabella was put in charge of anything I cared about. But I was tired, beaten down by my beige life. So I said, "Okay, just be careful with the kitchen stuff, please. Especially the wooden box on the pantry shelf. Of course, darling. We wouldn't dream of touching it." The wooden box. It wasn't just a box. It was a hand-carved chest made of dark, fragrant cedar. Inside, nestled in worn linen, was Nonna Lucia's grimoire. Her life. A leather-bound book, its pages softened and stained with olive oil, wine, and tomato. Every recipe she had ever perfected, written in her elegant, looping script. The secret to her ragu that simmered for 8 hours. The precise fold for her tortellini. The one ingredient in her almond biscotti that no one, not even me, had ever been able to guess. It wasn't just a cookbook. It was my inheritance, my history, the very soul of the passion for food she had passed down to me. It was the one thing I had left of her. When I got back from Chicago, smelling of hotel soap and failure, I went straight to the house. It felt sterile. The familiar comforting scent of dried herbs and old wood was gone, replaced by the sharp chemical tang of bleach. In the pantry, the shelf was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. I called my aunt. "The book," I said. No preamble. "Nonna's recipe book. It's gone." There was a pause. "Oh, Elara, you're always misplacing things. Are you sure you know where you left it?" "It was on the pantry shelf, in the cedar box. You said you wouldn't touch it." "Well, we had to clean, dear. There was so much dust. Isabella handled all of that. I'm sure it's safe." "Why are you so worked up? It's just some old recipes. Just some old recipes." I hung up the phone and sank onto a kitchen chair, the one Nonna used to sit in. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel numb. I felt a deep tectonic rage begin to shift beneath the surface of my grief. And now, staring at this Instagram post, at my Nonna's legacy being repackaged as my cousin's brand, that rage found its focus. It wasn't a hot, screaming anger. It was cold. It was clear. It was the most alive I'd felt in years. They thought I was the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who would just grieve silently in her beige box. They had miscalculated. They had stolen the heart of my family, and I was about to serve it back to them on a platter. The injustice of it all sat in my chest like a stone. This wasn't just about a stolen book. It was about a stolen identity, a stolen story. My story. My Nonna's story. For years, my family had operated on a simple, unspoken system. Isabella was the sun, and I was a planet caught in her orbit, expected to reflect her light, and never cast a shadow of my own. She was the go-getter, the innovator, the one with potential. I was the artist, the dreamer, the one who was too emotional. It was a narrative they had all agreed upon, a convenient way to categorize us, to manage their expectations. Isabella's ambition was praised as drive. My passion was dismissed as a hobby. After Nonna Lucia died, that dynamic intensified. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, became a battlefield of memory and expectation. The scent of garlic and rosemary, which used to be my comfort, started to feel like an accusation. Every time I tried to cook one of her dishes, I could feel their eyes on me. Aunt Sophia would sigh dramatically. "Oh, it's good, Elara, but it's not quite Nonna's, is it?" Uncle Matteo would taste it and say, "You should really write these down properly. Isabella could turn this into a business. A line of sauces, maybe." They weren't tasting the food. They were assessing its market value. They saw my inheritance not as a gift to be cherished, but as an asset to be liquidated. Their pressure was relentless. They wanted me to package Nonna's soul and sell it, to put her face on a jar. The thought of it made me physically ill. It felt like a desecration. So I stopped. I locked the part of me that was a chef away. I took the corporate job, the one that paid well and demanded nothing of my heart. I traded my apron for a blazer, my knives for a keyboard. I retreated into my beige world because it was safe. In that world, nothing was sacred, so nothing could be violated. I let the grief and the pressure build a wall around my passion, and I told myself it was self-preservation. In reality, it was a slow surrender. I was letting them win. Isabella reveled in my retreat. She'd call me, her voice dripping with pity. "Still playing with spreadsheets, cuz? I just closed a seed round for my new tech venture. You should really get out there. The world doesn't wait for people who are stuck in the past." She'd say it while I was looking at photos of my hands, my knuckles scarred with small nicks and burns from years at the stove, hands that knew how to knead dough and butcher a lamb. And I'd feel a pang of shame. She made my history feel like a weakness. The day I discovered the book was gone. The gaslighting was immediate and absolute. When I confronted Isabella directly over the phone, her response was a masterclass in psychological warfare. "A book?" she'd scoffed, feigning confusion. "Elara, I think you're being a little dramatic. We were just cleaning. You're so attached to things. Honestly, it's not healthy. It was probably falling apart anyway. I'm doing you a favor, helping you move on." "You stole it, Isabella." "Stole? That's such an ugly word," she tisked. "I prefer to think of it as preserving a legacy. You were just letting it gather dust on a shelf. I'm giving it life. I'm sharing it with the world. Nonna would be so proud." That was the line that broke me. Nonna would be so proud. Nonna, who believed a meal was a prayer. Nonna, who measured ingredients with her heart and her hands, not with focus groups and profit margins. The audacity of it, the sheer, calculated cruelty of using our grandmother's memory as a shield for her theft, was breathtaking. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my sterile apartment, the silence screaming at me. I kept seeing the Instagram post in my mind, curated by visionary restaurateur Isabella Rossi. Every word was a lie built on my silence, a lie my family was not only tolerating, but actively investing in. I found out through a stray comment from my uncle that he and my aunt had poured their savings into Isabella's vision. They were all in. They had chosen their side. In that moment, something inside me snapped into place. It wasn't the fragile, emotional Elara they all thought they knew. It was someone else, someone colder, more focused. The grief that had paralyzed me for years began to sublimate, transforming into a diamond-hard resolve. They thought I was stuck in the past. Fine. I would use the past to destroy their future. They wanted to see Nonna's legacy given life. I would show them what that really looked like. I walked over to my laptop, the one I used for my soul-crushing job, and opened a new browser window. I didn't search for lawyers. I didn't draft angry emails. I typed in commercial real estate listings, Heritage District. And there it was. A small, forgotten spot. A former print shop, grimy and neglected, with large front windows caked in dust. It was available for a short-term lease, and it was directly, insultingly, beautifully, right across the street from the polished, sandblasted brick building that was soon to be Nonna's table. A slow, fierce smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like a decade. Isabella was about to get a lesson in authentic cooking. This wasn't going to be a legal battle. It was going to be a war fought with cast-iron pans and old-world recipes. She had stolen the book, but she hadn't stolen the memory. She had the words, but I had the music. And I was about to turn the volume all the way up. The decision to act was like a dam breaking. All the pent-up frustration, the quiet resentment, the grief I had swallowed for years. It all came rushing out, not as tears, but as a plan. The very next morning, I walked into my boss's glass-walled office. He was a man named Greg, whose only passion was optimizing workflow. He was sipping a nutrient slurry from a sleek, minimalist bottle. "Greg?" I said, my voice steady. "I quit." He blinked, his mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. "Elara, we have the quarterly brand synergy forecast due on Friday. Is this about the new coffee machine? I told you we're looking into the oat milk situation." "It's not about the oat milk, Greg. I'm going to open a restaurant." He almost choked on his slurry. "A restaurant? But you're a strategist. You analyze market data. You don't cook." The words hung in the air. "You don't cook." It was the lie I had been telling myself and the world for 3 years. "That's where you're wrong," I said. And for the first time, I believed it. I turned and walked out, leaving him staring at my empty beige cubicle. I didn't even pack my personal items. There was nothing personal there to pack. That afternoon, I met the landlord of the derelict print shop. He was a grizzled old man named Sal, who looked at me, then at the building, then back at me. "You sure about this, kid? The plumbing's a nightmare, and I think a family of pigeons has claimed squatters' rights in the attic." "I'm sure," I said, my eyes fixed on the gleaming, soon-to-open restaurant across the street. Nonna's table had a crew of designers and contractors buzzing around it like flies. They were installing chic, industrial lighting and a sign made of reclaimed barnwood. It looked expensive and completely soulless. "What are you gonna call your place?" Sal asked, chewing on an unlit cigar. I looked across the street at the imitation of my grandmother's name and felt a spark of defiant inspiration. "Lucia's Ghost," I said. Sal raised an eyebrow. "Spooky. I like it." The next 2 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. I drained my savings account, the one I'd been diligently feeding with my corporate salary. I cashed out the stocks I'd been given as bonuses. Every penny of my beige life was now being funneled into this act of rebellion. I hired a plumber who swore a lot, but knew his way around ancient pipes. I called in favors from old friends in the industry, a line cook who was tired of his Michelin-starred tyrant of a boss, a waitress who could charm a tip out of a statue. They came, not for the money because there wasn't much, but for the story, for the sheer audacity of it. We didn't have the budget for designers. Our decor was a collection of mismatched tables I found at thrift stores, chairs donated by friends, and strings of simple Edison bulbs. We painted the walls a warm, deep blue, and I hand-painted a mural of the Amalfi Coast on one wall, a messy, vibrant, imperfect copy of a postcard Nonna had kept taped to her refrigerator. The centerpiece was the kitchen. It was open, completely visible to the dining area. There were no secrets here. We installed a huge, second-hand 6-burner gas range that we nicknamed The Beast. While Isabella was giving interviews to food bloggers about her innovative take on tradition, I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing a century's worth of ink and grime off the floorboards. While she was approving font choices for her menus, I was in the basement with Sal, trying to figure out which ancient fuse box controlled the lights. My family, of course, heard about my project. My Aunt Sophia called, her voice a cocktail of panic and condescension. Lara, what is this I hear? A restaurant across the street from Isabella. Are you trying to embarrass us? This is a cry for help. You're not well. I've never been better, Aunt Sophia, I said calmly, while stirring a massive pot of simmering tomato sauce. The aroma filled my small dusty space, the first real food it had known. How's Isabella's menu development going? Is she having trouble reading Nonna's handwriting? The line went dead. The most crucial part was the food. I didn't have the book, but Nonna Lucia hadn't just taught me recipes. She had taught me a language. I closed my eyes and let my hands remember. The feel of flour and egg coming together for pasta dough. The exact moment garlic turns fragrant in hot olive oil, just before it burns. The low, patient simmer of a true ragu. I didn't need the book for the classics. The tagliatelle al ragu, the pollo alla cacciatora, the simple, perfect pesto alla genovese. But there were other recipes, the more obscure ones, the ones with the secret twists. For those, I had to dig deeper. I had to become a detective of my own memory. I remembered one afternoon, I was maybe 10 years old, watching her make her special almond biscotti. She'd let me help, but shooed me away when she added one final ingredient from a small, unmarked jar. She called it her segreto, her secret. I remembered the scent. It was floral, but also earthy. Anise? No, too sharp. Lavender? Too perfumed. I spent 2 days experimenting, baking batch after batch of biscotti, filling my tiny kitchen with the ghosts of failed attempts. Then it hit me. A memory of her in the garden, picking at a small star-shaped flower. Borage, the flower that tastes faintly of cucumber and oyster. It was a peasant's ingredient, something no modern chef would think to use. I found some at a small farmer's market, ground the petals into a fine powder, and added it to the dough. I pulled the finished biscotti from the oven. The scent was exactly right. It smelled like my grandmother's kitchen. It smelled like victory. I sat on a paint-splattered stool, took a bite, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from a profound sense of reclamation. Isabella could have the paper and ink. I had the soul, and the ghost of Lucia was just getting warmed up. To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand my Nonna Lucia. She wasn't just a grandmother. She was a force of nature disguised as a small, flour-dusted Italian woman. Her kitchen was the center of our family's universe. It was where disputes were settled, where triumphs were celebrated, and where sorrows were soothed. usually with a bowl of her stratospherically good minestrone. For her, food wasn't about sustenance. It was about connection. It was the language she used to say, "I love you, I'm sorry, and I'm here." I was her shadow from the time I could walk. While other kids were playing outside, I was perched on a stool in her kitchen, my chin barely clearing the countertop, watching her hands work magic. She never used measuring cups. A pizzico, a pinch of salt, a goccio, a drop of olive oil, a manciata, a handful of flour. She taught me to cook, not with my eyes, but with all my senses. "You don't look at the dough, Elara," she'd say, guiding my small hands. "You listen to it. It will tell you when it's thirsty. You feel it. It will tell you when it's rested." Isabella, on the other hand, was always impatient. She was 2 years older, and her visits to the kitchen were brief and transactional. She didn't want to learn the process. She just wanted the result. "Nonna, can you just make the cookies now?" she'd whine, tapping her foot. "I have to meet my friends." She saw the kitchen as a service department, not a sanctuary. The stains on Nonna's apron, which I saw as badges of honor, Isabella saw as messy. The smell of simmering garlic, which I found intoxicating, she complained, was stinky. I remember one time, I must have been 12, and she was 14. Nonna was teaching us to make gnocchi. It's a delicate process. Overwork the dough, and you get dense, gummy bullets instead of light, fluffy pillows. I was carefully, gently rolling the dough, feeling its texture, just as Nonna had taught me. Isabella got bored. She started pounding her dough, like she was trying to tenderize a steak. "Isabella, piano, piano," Nonna warned gently. "Be gentle with them." "This is faster," Isabella declared, ignoring her. Predictably, her gnocchi were a disaster. When they were boiled, they were hard as pebbles. Mine were perfect. At dinner, everyone praised my gnocchi. Isabella, furious at being upstaged, threw her fork down. "It's not my fault," she announced to the table. "Elara bumped my arm when I was adding the flour. She made me put too much in. She's always trying to make me look bad." It was a blatant lie. A ridiculous lie. But my Aunt Sophia and Uncle Matteo immediately jumped to her defense. "Now, Elara, you know Isabella is trying. You should be more careful." My own parents, ever the non-confrontational peacekeepers, just told me to apologize to keep the peace. So I sat there, my stomach in knots, and mumbled an apology for something I didn't do, while Isabella smirked at me from across the table. That was the pattern. Her failure, my fault. Her ambition, my smallness. It was a dynamic that solidified after Nonna passed away. The grief hit me like a physical blow. I felt unmoored. The center of my world was gone. All I wanted to do was honor her by preserving the sanctity of her kitchen and her recipes. But for Isabella and her parents, Nonna's death wasn't a loss. It was an opportunity. That's when the pressure started. "Elara, you have a gift," my aunt would say. "But a gift is wasted if you don't monetize it. Think of the brand. Nonna Lucia's Kitchen. It's perfect." They didn't understand that for me, branding it was the same as killing it. It would strip the love out of it, turn her memory into a commodity. The pressure was so intense, so deeply misaligned with the very essence of what Nonna taught me, that it triggered a kind of creative shutdown. The joy was gone. The kitchen became a place of anxiety. So I ran. I ran to the beige safety of the corporate world, where food was a product, not a prayer. I let them believe I had lost my passion. It was easier than fighting a battle I knew I couldn't win. I packed away her legacy, symbolized by that cedar box, and told myself I was protecting it. I didn't realize I was just making it easier to steal. Staring at the grimy windows of my future pop-up, I finally understood. My retreat hadn't protected anything. It had only emboldened them. They saw my grief not as a wound to be respected, but as a weakness to be exploited. They assumed I was too lost in the past to fight for my future. They believed their own narrative about me, the quiet, emotional, fragile artist who would crumble under pressure. But they had forgotten what Nonna Lucia taught me. She taught me about the slow, transformative power of heat. She taught me that sometimes you have to let things simmer for a very, very long time to get the deepest flavor. My anger, my grief, my sense of injustice. I had been simmering them for 3 years, and I was finally ready to serve the main course. Isabella wanted to sell a story about my grandmother. I was about to tell the true one, and the whole city was invited to taste the difference. The night before my pop-up, Lucia's ghost was set to open. Isabella came to see me. It wasn't a friendly visit. It was a territorial display. She sauntered across the street from her gleaming, perfectly lit establishment. A vision in a designer blazer and razor-sharp heels that clicked menacingly on the pavement. My place was still a mess of beautiful chaos. My small crew and I were setting the last of the mismatched tables, the air thick with the smell of lemon-scented wood polish, fresh basil, and simmering rage. She stopped in the doorway. Her lips curled into a semblance of a smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. She took in the hand-painted mural, the thrift store chairs, the open kitchen, where a massive stockpot was burbling away on the beast. "Elara," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "What is this? It looks like a bake sale." I didn't stop polishing the wine glass in my hand. "It's a restaurant, Isabella. You know, a place where people cook and serve food. You should look it up." She stepped inside, running a manicured finger over a dusty windowsill, then inspecting it with disgust. "This is just sad. It's a desperate cry for attention. Are you really so obsessed with me that you had to open this shack right across the street?" "I'm not obsessed with you," I said, finally looking up and meeting her gaze. My voice was quiet, calm. "I'm correcting the record. You're a plagiarist, Isabella. You stole our grandmother's life's work and put your name on it." She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, grow up. I didn't steal anything. I curated it. I elevated it. You were letting those recipes die in a dusty box. I'm giving them a platform. I'm building a brand. Something you were too sentimental and weak to ever do. Nonna was an artist, but she had no business sense. I'm honoring her by making her legacy profitable." "You think her legacy is about profit?" I placed the glass down gently. "Her legacy was about feeding the people you loved. It was about generosity. It was about honesty. Concepts I know are a little foreign to you." Her eyes narrowed. "You're just jealous. You've been jealous of me your whole life. You couldn't handle the real world, so you hid in your corporate job, and now you're throwing a tantrum because I'm succeeding where you failed. This little project of yours will be closed in a week. We'll see, I said, turning my back on her and walking toward the stove. Mom and Dad told me they tried to talk some sense into you, she called after me. They're so embarrassed. They invested everything in me, you know. In a real business. Not in this. She gestured around the room with a flick of her wrist. I lifted the heavy lid off the stockpot. A cloud of fragrant steam billowed out, smelling of roasted bones, mirepoix, and herbs. The foundational broth for half my menu. They invested in a lie, Isabella, and lies have a way of catching up to you. My grand opening is tomorrow night. I have reservations booked for a month. The most important food critic in the city is coming, she said, her voice laced with triumph. What do you have? A pot of soup and a bunch of broken chairs. I dipped a ladle into the broth, poured a small amount into a cup, and turned to face her. I held it out. I have the truth, I said. Want a taste? Want a... The look on her face was a mixture of fury, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear. She knew that broth. She knew its aroma. It was the smell of our childhood, the smell of the one thing she could never replicate. She didn't have the patience. She didn't have the heart. She didn't have the secret. She spun on her heel and stormed out, her sharp, clicking footsteps echoing down the street. The confrontation wasn't a shouting match. It was quieter, colder, and far more definitive. The battle lines hadn't just been drawn, they were carved in stone. She had her investors, her designer decor, and her stolen book. I had a pot of broth, a ghost for a partner, and a story that was finally ready to be told. The next night, the city would decide which one they were hungrier for. Opening night was terrifying and exhilarating. We didn't have a PR team or a marketing budget. My entire promotional campaign consisted of one chalkboard sign I placed on the sidewalk out front. In my best slightly shaky handwriting, it read, Lucia's Ghost. No reservations, no pretense, just food with a soul. Come taste a true story. Across the street, Nonna's table was a spectacle. Valet parking, a red carpet, spotlights sweeping the sky. A crowd of surgically enhanced, fashionably dressed people milled about, sipping champagne from delicate flutes. I saw the city's top food critic, Anton Dubois, a man whose reviews could make or break a restaurant overnight, step out of a black car and sweep inside. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first customers were a young couple, drawn in by the smell of garlic and the warm light spilling from my windows. They looked nervous, like they'd stumbled into a private party. I greeted them myself. Welcome to Lucia's Ghost, I said with a smile that felt more real than any I'd worn in years. Find any seat you like. My menu was small, written on a single sheet of paper. 5 appetizers, 5 mains, 3 desserts. Each dish was named not with a fancy Italian title, but with a memory. There was the ragu that forgave all sins, Nonna's Be Quiet and Eat Minestrone, and the dessert that started it all, the biscotti with a secret. When a customer ordered a dish, I didn't just serve it, I told its story. This is the pasta my nonna would make on rainy days, I'd explain. She said the dough could feel the humidity in the air. Or, she only made this lamb shank for celebrations. I remember the first time I made it for her, she cried and said it was better than hers. It wasn't, but she said it anyway. The food did the rest. It was honest. It was rich, deep, and complex. It tasted of time and love. It was everything brand strategy and market testing could never replicate. My small team moved with a fluid, chaotic grace. The clatter of pans from the open kitchen, the murmur of happy diners, the laughter. It was a symphony. Word spread like wildfire in the digital age. A local food blogger, one who had ignored Isabella's glossy press releases, wandered in, intrigued by the chalkboard. He ordered the tagliatelle al ragu. I watched as he took his first bite. His eyes closed. A slow smile spread across his face. He didn't take a picture of the food. He took a picture of his empty plate. His post went live an hour later. Forget the manufactured hype across the street. I just found the ghost of real Italian cooking. Her name is Lucia, and her granddaughter Elara is channeling her with every plate. This isn't a restaurant. It's a séance. And I believe. By 9 o'clock, we had a line down the block. People were willing to wait an hour for a table in my bake sale of a restaurant. They crowded onto the sidewalk, sharing stories, peering into my steamy windows. I saw some of the patrons from Nonna's table glance over, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Their own restaurant, for all its polish, felt strangely quiet and stiff. Then, it happened. Anton Dubois, the critic, walked out of Isabella's restaurant. He looked unimpressed. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, adjusted his scarf, and then his eyes fell on the crowd outside my door. He saw the life, the energy. He saw the blogger's post on his phone. He hesitated, then did something unheard of. He crossed the street. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He walked into my chaotic, beautiful mess of a restaurant. I had no tables left. My heart stopped. Sal, my landlord, who had been sitting at a makeshift bar drinking espresso, immediately stood up. "He can have my seat," he growled. I served Anton Dubois myself. I brought him a small plate of 3 things. A single, perfect cheese-filled tortellino in broth, a spoonful of the ragu, and 1 almond biscotto. I didn't say a word. I just set the plate down and walked away. He ate slowly, deliberately. I could feel every eye in the restaurant on him. Across the street, I could see Isabella's face, a pale mask of horror, watching from her own window. After what felt like an eternity, he finished, wiped his mouth with a simple paper napkin, and stood up. He walked over to the open kitchen, right up to the counter where I was plating pasta. He looked me straight in the eye. "Your grandmother," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "was a genius." He nodded once, turned, and left. The restaurant erupted in applause. The next day, his review came out. It was titled, "The Tale of Two Nonnas." He eviscerated Nonna's table. "A soulless, corporate facsimile of Italian cooking," he wrote. "Technically proficient, emotionally bankrupt. It is a restaurant that has read the book, but clearly missed the story." He then dedicated 3 paragraphs to Lucia's ghost. He called it a revelation, a triumph of heart over hype, and the most honest meal I've had all year. He ended the review with a single, devastating line. "One restaurant sells recipes, the other serves a legacy. Choose wisely." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Isabella. Her reservations evaporated overnight. The buzz died, replaced by an awkward silence. My line grew longer. The family, of course, panicked. My Uncle Matteo called me, his voice strained. "Elara, you've made your point. This has to stop. You're ruining your cousin." "I'm not doing anything, Uncle Matteo." I replied calmly. I'm just cooking. The people are deciding which story they want to believe. Your aunt is a wreck. We put our retirement into this. You have to help us. Help you? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Where were you when I needed help? When you all stood by and let her steal my one precious thing? You didn't invest in a restaurant. You invested in a thief. And this is the market correction. I hung up the phone. A few weeks later, the for-lease sign went up in the window of Nonna's table. The ghost had won. My pop-up was so successful I was able to sign a long-term lease. I was no longer a ghost. I was an anchor in the neighborhood. My family didn't speak to me for months. But then, one evening, a reservation appeared in my book under the name Rossi. My aunt and uncle. I let them come. I served them the best meal of their lives. And at the end, I brought the check. There are some debts that can't be paid with money. But this one could. One quiet Tuesday night, months after the dust had settled, I was wiping down the counter after closing. The restaurant was quiet, filled with the satisfying ghosts of the evening service. A young woman who had become a regular, a student from the nearby university, lingered by the door. Elara, she asked shyly, can I ask you something? Of course. Your story, the one the bloggers wrote about. Is it true about your cousin and the book? I paused, then nodded slowly. The important parts are, yes. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, her eyes shining with a fierce light I recognized. I'm a writer, she said. My professor. He's a very famous poet. He took a poem I wrote, changed a few words, and published it in a major journal under his own name. Everyone told me to let it go, that he's too powerful, that I'll ruin my career if I fight him. They said I should be flattered. I stopped wiping the counter and gave her my full attention. You should never be flattered by theft, I said, my voice softer than I intended. They didn't just steal your words. They tried to steal your voice. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. What do I do? I thought about the beige cubicle, the years of silence, the cold rage that had finally thawed me out. I thought about the choice I had made, not to fight on their terms with lawyers and anger, but on mine, with passion and truth. You don't fight him, I said. You write. You write so much and so beautifully and so honestly that your voice becomes undeniable. You build your own stage, and you tell your own story so loudly and clearly that his stolen version becomes nothing more than a cheap, forgotten echo. You show them the difference between an imitation and an original. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, a slow, determined smile spread across her face. Thank you, she whispered, and left. I never knew what happened with her professor, but I like to think she went out and built her own library. One true sentence at a time. My story isn't really about revenge. Not anymore. It started that way, born from a place of deep hurt and injustice. But it became something else. It became a reclamation. I didn't just take back my grandmother's recipes. I took back my own passion, my own identity. I had let them define me as the fragile artist, the one who was too much. I had internalized their narrative and built a prison of it. The theft of the book wasn't the attack. It was the key that unlocked the door. I learned that a legacy isn't a fragile object you can lock away in a box. It's a living, breathing thing. It's a fire. If you don't tend to it, it dies. If you try to control it, you get burned. But if you respect it, if you feed it with your own truth and your own passion, it will light your way. They thought they were stealing a book of recipes. They had no idea they were handing me a book of matches. I don't speak to Isabella or her parents. There was no grand reconciliation. There was no apology. There is just a quiet, clean space where all that noise used to be. Sometimes peace isn't about forgiveness. It's about accepting that some chapters are over and turning the page. My life is no longer beige. It's the deep red of a perfect tomato sauce, the vibrant green of fresh basil, the golden brown of a well-baked loaf of bread. It's messy and chaotic and loud and completely, authentically mine. My grandmother's ghost doesn't haunt my restaurant. She presides over it, and we're both finally at peace. So that's my story. What do you think? Was building my own success the best form of revenge? Or should I have taken a more direct approach from the start? I'm genuinely curious to hear what you would have done in my situation. Let me know down in the comments. Your stories and perspectives are what make this community so incredible. And if you found something in my story that resonated with you, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. There are a lot more stories where this one came from. Thanks for listening.